I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report. He's speaking to us from Japan, where he has lived and worked since 2004. Welcome back to the show, James.
Pleasure to be here, Jim. Thanks for having me.
The sanctions against North Korea, what are they and will they work?
Well, that's actually a good question because as everyone knows, there have been multiple rounds of sanctions that have been slapped on North Korea over the preceding years, and they haven't seemed to do anything to deter North Korea from its nuclear program. So will this latest round, and of course the latest word is that the UN Security Council did vote to increase sanctions against North Korea on Monday, but well, they are not quite as extensive as at least the Trump administration was apparently going for, or specifically UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. But if there is anything that I think is perhaps hopeful from the perspective of actually having an effect this time, it would be the fact that the latest word out is that Chinese state banks that operate in North Korea are now actually starting to suspend North Korean transactions. And this comes out of Kyodo News. And they're pointing out that it isn't the case that these Chinese banks are actually freezing the accounts that they operate in North Korea, but they are now preventing these accounts from making deposits or remittances. And this is at least a step towards something regarding China actually ratcheting up and trying to bring pressure to bear on this issue financially. So I think that might actually be something different this time around that may actually have an effect on the situation. And clearly, I think China is reading the tea leaves, as it were, as to the fact that they're getting the blame, whether that's fair or not. They're certainly getting some of the blame for North Korea's recent actions. So I think this is a move on China's part to at least be seen to be doing something a little bit stronger than we've seen in the past.
Well, I've heard, too, the U.S. military says it has a lightning strike plan to take out North Korea's atomic weapons and escalating. Maybe explain to people the difference between an atomic bomb and an H-bomb, which people are now pretty sure the North Koreans have.
Right. So it has to do the difference between fusion and fission, and fission being used as a trigger for a fusion bomb or a thermonuclear bomb. So obviously, the more destructive capacity weapons are the thermonuclear weapons, and they use fission as basically a boost for it. So the H bombs, and this is apparently where North Korea is heading. I'm not sure if the final word has come out about that recent nuclear test, but they were saying it was somewhere on the order of several times larger than what we saw at Hiroshima, according to what was the latest last time I checked on this. So they are at any rate getting closer and closer towards a thermonuclear weapon, if not actually making them. Of course, there's other factors that go into this whole equation, which is the miniaturization of the warhead and whether or not they're able to actually put one on one of their ICBMs, and then whether they have re-entry capabilities with those ICBMs so they can actually get down to the targets. And I think we're still a ways off from either of those eventualities. But at any rate, it is progressing, it is getting closer, and certainly the destructive capacity of these nuclear tests, to the extent that these things can be determined from afar, certainly seems to be increasing.
Well, even if the thing goes off in space, the electromagnetic pulse could wipe out the electronics in that part of your country for a decade.
This is a scenario that has been painted by a number of people. I think it's a lot of fear-mongering at this point. I don't think North Korea has the ability to deliver that over the continental U.S. at this point in any feasible manner, and I don't think that's part of any sort of strategy. The thing that worries me most about the situation is the idea of a lightning strike taking out North Korea's nuclear capacity. Perhaps that would be possible, but something that certainly would not be possible would be some sort of strike that would also prevent North Korea from using the conventional artillery that it does have lined up along the demilitarized zone that absolutely could strike Seoul. It seems to me there's no way to start a military situation at this point that would not involve the deaths of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people on the Korean Peninsula, including South Koreans and including some of the U.S. forces that are obviously there within stone's throw of the DMZ. So it's a horribly volatile situation, and I don't think the military solution is, even just from a military perspective, is the best idea here.
Right. So they're within 50 kilometers of the border, and atomic artillery shells were developed in the 50s, and Seoul is within artillery range of North Korea. It would be a slaughter, just simply that.
There's no doubt about it, and there's no way to really hit all and take out all of the North Korean artillery that's lined up along the border there all at once. There would be some strike that would be possible, no matter how thorough the first waves of military deployment on North Korea are. So I think that's the thing that has to be kept in mind here. At this point, there's no military way to defuse this without the deaths of quite a number of people. And let's keep in mind that fully half of South Korea's population lives within the Seoul area, upwards of 25 million people. So that's a lot of targets for a regime that's launching out against some attack.
And although the U.S. cruise missile attack on that Syrian airbase seemed to be pretty awesome, insiders tell us that anywhere to up to half those missiles never made it there or failed to hit their target.
Yes, in fact, yes. I believe half of them never made it, and then of the ones that did, very few of them actually did any damage to speak of. They made a couple of holes in a couple of runways, and but that was essentially it. It was, in terms of military value for that strike that we saw earlier this year, it was almost a complete failure.
Yes, the field was operational a few hours later. If that had been a North Korean field, I'm sure it would have been.
Yes, I think that's the situation. So that's the calculus we're working from. Again, it's not clear that sanctions are going to really be doing much at this point, unless there can be some genuine teeth to them and some real Chinese pressure brought to bear.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. James, how have the Asian stock markets been doing lately?
Not as volatile as you might believe. In fact, there are a lot of economic signs, at least in East Asia here where I'm situated, that are perhaps rosier than you would expect. Japan's economy is officially growing. In fact, the latest GDP figures show that over the last quarter, it was growing at an annualized rate of 2.5%, which is not a blistering pace compared to some of the Chinese figures we've seen in recent years, but at any rate, it's a modest success for the Abe government, I suppose, or at least they'll claim success on that front. And from China, we're getting a number of actually pieces of data that do point to actual economic growth, not the cooked books of the Chinese government, but actual figures like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, and the Producer Price Index, both showing signs of inflation as there is a stronger than expected economic activity going on in the manufacturing sector in China. There's a number of other signs of that, spike in sales of construction equipment, for example, and other things that people can point to show that China seems to be certainly increasing economic activity right now, and perhaps even going into a phase of growing economic activity. So that's important, obviously, for the region generally, and I think those are some of the things that the markets are responding to right now. Obviously, the uncertainty over the North Korean situation does not help markets, but there seems to be, at any rate, reasons for economic optimism.
Has China removed some of its artificial supports for the yuan?
Well, I suppose that depends on what way you look at it. Of course, it is still a floating pegged currency. It is pegged by the People's Bank of China, but within a floating band, and it is allowed to float within that band every day. And in fact, it's actually been strengthening recently as a result, presumably, at least in part, of some of this increasing economic activity that we're seeing. So in fact, I believe the peg was just the yuan was just pegged at its highest value in a year and a half. So there does seem to be a currency rebound that's going on right now on the basis of economic activity and at least Beijing rhetoric about more stability in the markets. So we'll see if that actually lives up to it. But at any rate, at this point, it seems that the yuan is gradually increasing.
Well, the Canadian dollar is also enjoying the best it's seen in several years, well over 82 cents versus U.S. But I wonder, is it because Canada is doing better? They said our GDP annualized is over 4%. But have they cooked the books to make it look better? And are they just setting us up for a reason to cut interest rates so that it looks like they're doing something?
Yes, well, that's always an option on the table and something that we should be looking into. But I think one of the other factors that we should keep in mind, of course, it's not, when you're looking at the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. dollar, it's not simply a question of the Canadian dollar and why it may be going up, but also the U.S. dollar and why it may be going down. So we've seen commentators, even in the Globe and Mail and others, talking about the U.S. dollar being broken, so the Canadian dollar may just win by default. And I think that's at least part of what's happening here. The U.S. dollar is falling against a range of currencies, including the Japanese yen, as I can attest to here in Japan. So clearly, I think this is at least partly more to do with the U.S. dollar than it is the strength of the Canadian dollar.
Yeah, so maybe we should avoid the chest thumping.
Yes.
On both in Japan and Canada. It's
well, if you have the opportunity to, why not? But maybe at least keep in mind that it may actually be nothing that Canada is doing per se.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after this.
Arctic Star Exploration, operated by a team of proven mine finders, is focused on diamonds in Finland and the Northwest Territories of Canada. A work program is planned for our Finland property that contains diamond-bearing kimberlite. Arctic Star trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ADD, and the Frankfurt Exchange, symbol 82A1. Please visit our website at arcticstar.ca or call us at 604-689-1799.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with James Corbett in Japan. James, the Chinese government has stopped new cryptocurrencies from being put up there. Are they cracking down on Bitcoin itself?
There has been some, let's use the term fake news regarding China and Bitcoin floating around recently. The idea was floated that China was actually shutting down Bitcoin exchanges altogether so that people would not be able to convert money into or out of cryptocurrencies. That seems, unless things have changed recently, that seems to have been a rumor or fake news of some sort that was being reported unsourced, I believe, by Caixin News, which has had the inside track on some of the things going on in China with regards to cryptocurrencies in the past, so people took it as at face value. But it seems that those reports may be overblown. And again, I haven't looked in the last day, so we'll see if there is that crackdown on the way. But at any rate, it seems they're not banning Bitcoin exchanges outright completely. But clearly China is putting pressure on Bitcoin exchanges. They have been for several months now. There's a lot more stringent rules that they are asking these exchanges to follow as a part of their general clampdown on capital outflows. And that has generally been successful to a certain extent in when you look at the numbers on the actual exchanges themselves. But I was reading an interesting analysis recently, and unfortunately I can't cite it because I do not remember where I was reading it, but they were breaking down the numbers about local Bitcoin exchanges in China, i.e. not ones that you officially register with, but ones where you go and meet someone on the street and do a off the books transaction like that. And they were showing that there's a number of metrics showing that has exploded over the last several months as China has been attempting to crack down on the official exchanges. So it seems that the Chinese people are still finding ways around this. Now, the crackdown that may or may not be coming on exchanges may have more to do with that kind of direct person-to-person exchange than about the major large exchanges, which they already obviously have quite a bit of control over.
What happens to the people caught not using an official exchange?
That is a good question. I'm not sure what the latest ruling is in terms of the legality and illegality and punishment or what have you, but at any rate, if it is not a crime of some sort at this point, it certainly will be in the near future, one can imagine, because again, this is not a huge space yet. It's certainly people who have a large amount of wealth in China are not using Bitcoin as the primary means to get their capital overseas. But it is a growing market, and it is one way that the leak has sprung, as it were, on the Chinese economy. So clearly they are, I think the Beijing is seeing this as a problem, and there's every sign that they're moving more towards a controlled environment. So I'm not sure the exact legality of it and what the criminal charges would be at this point, but at any rate, as I say, I think they are moving towards the crackdown of anything except for the official government-approved exchanges. And
as we know in China, if you're arrested, you might as well consider yourself guilty.
Yes, and I suppose sitting here in Japan, one finger points at China, four fingers point back at Japan, which has famously, I think, I want to say 98%. At any rate, it's in the high 90% conviction rate. So if you're charged with a crime, basically you are going to do time. In Japan as well, but of course China, absolutely part of that phenomenon as well. It's unlikely, unless you pay your bribe to the right person, I suppose, it's unlikely you're going to escape the punishment for whatever you're charged with.
Yes, I've covered extradition cases where I asked the guy, why were you charged with corruption? I bribed the wrong person.
That's unfortunately the truth for, I think, a lot of this business in that space. It's perhaps not surprising in a very controlled economy like what China still is, but at any rate, it certainly doesn't bode well for people who are caught engaging in this type of naughty, no-no activity.
China says it's going to go along with Britain and France and ban the sale of gasoline and diesel-powered cars in the not-too-distant future. Is this something that we're going to see more and more countries do? But China right now is the world's biggest buyer of electronic cars.
That's right. And, of course, this is the way this is all supposed to go, according to the various deals that are being hammered out at the international level. The idea is that the developed countries that had the benefit of these petrochemicals over the course of their development from the Industrial Revolution onward are now going to be the ones who should be subsidizing and footing the bill for the developing countries to basically skip over that and go straight into an electric era. And so of course China has argued for and has been treated, at least to this point, as part of that developing crowd. So they will benefit from some of the subsidies that are offered in these types of agreements, like what we saw in Paris and others. So it perhaps is not surprising that China is leading the way in terms of solar energy development, and also are a major producer and consumer of electric vehicles. And I think this latest ban on production of petrol and diesel cars, as they're calling it, is just one sign of that.
Does Japan have the infrastructure to support electric vehicles, or are they trying to make sure that they stay in step so one day everybody doesn't plug in at once and there's no power to juice up the vehicle?
Well, Japan, for a number of years, was offering considerable incentives for placing solar panels on every house. Basically, anyone who owned a building was given quite a bit of incentive and subsidies from the government for putting up solar panels, so that you will now see, if you go driving around in Japan, that basically every house has solar panels on it, and this is all being fed back into the grid. So there is I think, an attempt to increase overall electric capacity here, with the understanding that that's going to be needed in the future. For a country that can barely produce enough energy as is, how is it going to deal with an electric grid that's also going to be filling up all these cars? And of course, Japan still likes to try to see itself as on the cutting edge of innovation and being ahead of the curve and all of this. So of course the Prius and others are examples of Japan trying to continue its dominance in automobile manufacturing markets, even as we go through this changeover. I am doubtful that they will maintain the type of market share that they've had in the past, but at any rate, they're still trying for that. But yes, the question of electrical capacity in Japan is always a question, and especially in the post-Fukushima world, where there's still the giant question mark about the future of nuclear energy in this country and how much can be produced that way, and then how much various liquefied natural gas and other petrochemicals have to be imported to supplement what's been lost from nuclear electrical generation.
What about tidal, wave, and wind power in Japan?
Yes, there are a number of test experiments that are being conducted off the shores of Japan, because obviously tidal power, if it could be adequately harnessed and distributed, would be an exceptionally valuable thing for a island nation like Japan, which really doesn't have a lot internally in terms of energy resources, so that would be great. And also the development of at least the talk in the post-Fukushima era of greater tapping into the not hydroelectric, the thermal energy, the hot springs and all of that. That energy it would represent, at any rate, maybe not a huge chunk, but at any rate some supplement to what is being generated right now. But most of that energy right now is in hot spring resorts and other things that are being used more for commercial or tourism purposes than they are for electrical generation. So there's been some talk of trying to pry that open for electrical use, but it's still a huge question. And so Japan is really trying, I think, everything that they can, including solar, including tidal, including thermal energy, and other things besides, to try to get out of the bind that they find themselves in right now.
Well, when your national symbol is Mount Fuji, a volcano, there must be hot water somewhere near there.
There's quite a bit, yes. I mean, I think it's related to the tectonic placement of Japan, and obviously that relates to the earthquakes and everything. It is volcanic, earthquake prone, and also, of course, there's a lot of energy there to be tapped. But it's a question of whether the Japanese people see the need to tap it, or if they prefer to have their hot spring vacations.
James, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report. He was speaking to us from Japan. You're listening to HowStreet.com Radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.